It's easy to start something new. It's hard to change something that has been around for decades. Sajan is an expert at turnaround procedures for failing businesses. He is a problem solver. Now he is taking his strategies to a needed place, public schools. The first project of this new initiative is the schools of Detroit. Next up, Matchbook learning will scale across the country in major cities everywhere. You will learn how to bring turnaround in a revolutionary way to your organization. Plywood presents Sajan George.
Most people believe that our nation's public education system is at a crossroads. I actually disagree. I don't think we're at a crossroads. I think we're actually on a trajectory. One whose conclusion, if unabated, threatens our national security. There's a lot of dismal statistics I could give you on public education today, but the one that angers me the most, the one that upsets me and even scares me is the following. If I was to go to any zip code in America, in the bottom 25% income-wise, and I was to follow 100 kids in that zip code, from kindergarten all the way through high school, college graduation, statistically, I would lose 91 of them along the way. Experts are projecting that the number of these chronically failing schools in just 3 years will reach 20,000 in number in our country. This is a problem worthy of our attention and efforts. And before I begin to talk about how we tackle this problem, it behooves me to at least look at the research that has gone before us. While no one's completely scaled to the top of the mountain in terms of how to solve this problem or how to turn around education, there's a lot we can learn. And while the research debates pretty vigorously on the best way to turn around public education, all of the research supports this one undeniable fact, that the single most important determinant of a child's academic success is the quality of the teacher that stands in front of him or her. Think about that. Quality teaching trumps every socioeconomic factor, including poverty. If we were to replace the bottom 25% teachers with top 25% teachers 4 years in a row, we would completely eliminate the achievement gap in this country between rich and poor. That research really boils down to one single conclusion: that your child is actually better off in a bad school with an excellent teacher than in an excellent school with a bad teacher. And that conclusion leads us to a single question, that if we pose this question, and if we can answer this question, we can actually solve the public education crisis in our country. How do we create good teachers to turn around bad schools? The diagnosis of our solution starts where the research ended. It seems simple, right? Give every student a good teacher. Except financially, that's impractical. And money aside, operationally, how do we actually create good teachers in every single zip code? Urban, suburban, rural. It's not possible. Or is it? Instead of creating good teachers or replicating good teachers physically, what if we replicated good teaching digitally? Instead of giving every student their own individual teacher, what if we gave them their own netbook and loaded on that netbook a learning management platform that replicated many good teaching attributes, engaging kids where they are, moving them to higher and higher levels of mastery, giving them instantaneous feedback, an array of content and experiences. And the minute I begin to frame out this solution, the critics would stand up and say, wait a minute, we're not creating robots. I don't want my kids being taught by a computer. We send our kids to school for more than just knowledge acquisition. What about peer-to-peer learning? What about having a caring professional adult over them? To which I say I completely agree. And so we don't have a solution. Or maybe our solution isn't either or. It's not either technology or a good teacher. But what if it was a both and? What would that look like? Let me give you a picture of our solution. You see, we'd have a physical teacher in the center of the classroom, and that teacher would divide the class up into smaller groups One group the teacher would be working with directly for a period of time. Still another through guided practice at a smartboard. Still another group would be doing project work, experiential learning. And still another group would be working individually on the computer. And the point is that because the entire classroom is on a technology platform, we can capture data on how these kids are learning in each of these groups as they rotate through them. And we can send that data to the teacher in the room, real time. And that teacher can use that data to optimize his or her time and talents with groups of students when they need him or her and where. So the question then becomes, well, how do we not just only give the data to the teacher, but how do we train the teacher to act on that data? What tools and processes? In a sense, we're creating the super teacher. But you can't create superheroes. They just simply are, with the exception of one, Batman. Batman's alter ego is Bruce Wayne. Bruce Wayne doesn't have any superpowers. He can't fly. He can't run faster than a speeding bullet. But he puts on that snazzy utility belt and he can do some pretty amazing things. So the question is, what does our utility belt look like for teachers? Therein lies the guts of our solution. I've spent my career doing turnarounds. I first did, for about a decade, corporate turnarounds, going to companies and turning them around. And then I spent another decade turning around large urban school districts, New York City, New Orleans, DC. And now I'm applying that turnaround methodology to individual schools with a blended model. And all of my experience in turnarounds has taught me that turnarounds are incredibly rare. That's why the media picks up on them whenever you see one. Steve Jobs being fired and then going back to Apple to resuscitate it. We love turnaround stories, but they're generally impossible unless there are 5 conditions present. This is true in school turnarounds or any turnarounds of any entity. With those 5 conditions, the turnaround isn't impossible. And in fact, it moves from impossible to possible with a well-designed solution that addresses the deficits, the specific deficits in the problem that we're tackling. And then the turnaround moves from possible to probable if we execute on 3 core practices. Let me explain each. The first is there's 5 conditions you need in order to even attempt to turn around. If you don't have these 5 conditions, don't bother attempting it. The first is vision. And that sounds obvious, but it's not. Case in point, the average urban school superintendent in this country lasts just 2.2 years on the job. Why such rapid turnover? They come in on a platform of change. They're incredibly skilled and gifted. They're frustrated with the status quo and they want to do right by kids. And I think most of them fail after just 2 years because of their inability within their vision to articulate a specific point B. Where are you headed in the distance? What does that future school look like? And articulating that in sufficient clarity that they can then map from point B back to point A where they are, a plumb line. And that plumb line is important because you have to map all of your decisions against that plumb line. And any turnaround, you're going to have to make trade-offs. Every turnaround has limited time, limited talent, and limited money. If any one of those 3 things was unlimited, let's face it, the turnaround would be easy. But because they're limited, you're going to have to make trade-offs, and you want to make those trade-offs in ways that are synergistic, that build upon each other. Because when you do that, you create momentum, and that momentum is necessary to actually overcome the years and even decades of failure that preceded you. With that vision in place, the second condition is the ability to prototype. There's no single one right way to teach all kids, just like there's no single one right way to train all teachers. We're going to have to prototype. What's exciting about a blended classroom is our ability to rapidly prototype because of the data that we're getting back. Once we're prototyping, the next is transparency. We spend a lot of time watching teachers and a lot of time watching students and the data flow that's happening between the two. It's that transparency is necessary because it actually informs and illuminates our prototyping ability, how and where we prototype. Otherwise, our prototyping is in the dark. A lot of turnarounds fail because people come in thinking, this is the exact strategy we're going to do to get from A to B. But the reality is the field conditions have to dictate what turns you make. The fourth condition is leverage. We put 2 full-time program managers for Matchbook learning in each of these schools. 2 people doesn't sound like a lot to turn around an entire school building. But here's the thing, I'm not betting on those 2 program managers' individual capacity to turn around the school. I'm betting on their ability to build the capacity of the teachers in the school. So we hire not superstar athletes, but superstar coaches and general managers. The final condition is grassroots support. Every turnaround can be started from the top down, but it ultimately is sustained from the bottoms up. In order to create grassroots movement for a turnaround or any social initiative, you have to recognize two important facts. The first, in any turnaround, there are numerous stakeholders that are involved. In a school, you have parents, you have teachers, you have the state and the district, you have the community. Number two, each of these stakeholders has a slightly different need as it relates to the turnaround. And so you have to address that need with a different set of tactics and a different tone of voice. Teachers, they want purpose in their craft. Students, they want to realize their dreams. Parents want to send their kids to college. The community wants restored pride in the building. The state and the district want accountability. And the point is, while the overall objective of turning around the school is the same, your communication tactics with these different stakeholders has to vary. With those 5 conditions in place, the turnaround is no longer impossible. It's worthy to be attempted. What makes the turnaround possible is the design of your solution. You have to address the deficits in a failed school. The obvious deficit is that there's an academic deficit. These kids are behind, way behind grade level. That's why the school's failing. So we have to address that. But there's another deficit. The other side of the coin is that the teachers are underperforming as well. We have to address the talent deficit. Let me explain how we do both. On the academic deficit, there's no single textbook in the print world that meets all kids where they are. And the same is true in the digital world. So we identify and layer various content, open source, third party, teacher created, and match that content to students based on what fits their learning profiles. The second area is there's so many factors that contribute to the school's academic deficit. How do you deal with socioeconomic issues, homelessness, poverty, drugs, pregnancy, family backgrounds, culture, low capacity? There's an incredible amount of confusion, uncertainty, ambiguity, and how all of these factors come to play to drive the low performance of the school. How do you address all those? Whenever you have a situation that is highly uncertain, highly unpredictable, the best thing you can do is map out in sufficient clarity your project plan. So we did that. There's 206 steps in our plan that takes a low-performing traditional school and eventually converts it to a high-performing blended or hybrid school. 206 steps sounds like a lot. Most schools, when they think about introducing technology into their classrooms, think about 2 steps. What's the hardware? What's the software? That's important. But those aren't the only 2 steps. By mapping these out, and I don't say that we have at the front end decide all these what the decisions are. We just frame out all the decision points. Because what we're doing is we're injecting probability, predictability, transparency in a situation that otherwise does not have those things. That's important in addressing the deficit. Once the academic deficit is being addressed, we turn our attention to the talent deficit. How do you recruit and select the people for your social organization? It amazes me how often people are really clear on the vision of their organization. We want to fight poverty or stop child sex trafficking or whatever their cause of the day may be. And then you ask them, what are the kinds of people that you're hiring for that? What are the core competencies that you're looking for? And all of a sudden their description becomes less clear. We need hardworking people. We need people passionate about the vision. Those are important. They're necessary, but they're not sufficient. After looking at over 5,000 educator resumes, we've found that there's 3 core competencies that we need our teachers to have in operating in these blended schools. The first is grit. It's a huge paradigm shift. In a traditional school where they're the sage on the stage, delivering all of the content, all of the assessments, to moving now to being more of a guide in the side, being a coach and a facilitator and a mentor. That requires perseverance to survive through that pivot, or grit. Second condition, innovation. I've already talked about prototyping. That involves risk-taking, trying strategies that you know may or may not work. And the third is transparency. Most teachers are not used to having a program manager or even another adult in the room while they teach. But that transparency is necessary for us to inform. We assess, we screen, we evaluate for these 3 competencies rigorously in our recruiting process. That enables us to take a really wide pool of applicants and identify those Bruce Waynes, those ordinary teachers with extraordinary ability. Once we recruit them, then we develop them. Never stop at just recruiting great people. Develop those competencies that you looked for in them, develop them. If you can't find them, if you can't find courses or training out there to develop them, create your own. That's what we did. Our teachers right now this month in Detroit are going through training that we've designed and developed to bring about those competencies. And they'll go through that throughout the year. With the design of our solution now making the turnaround possible, there's one final step that makes the turnaround probable. You've got to figure out what you have to execute flawlessly, with rigor, and without excuse. There's 3 core processes that we execute in our schools that enables the turnaround to be probable. The first is a daily classroom observation. The second is biweekly 20-mile marches or data reviews. And the third is quarterly goal setting with our teachers. Let me explain the first one. Every other day, our teachers get a classroom observation. Feedback around, are the students engaged? Do we observe, can we see evidence of their work product? Are they assessing students with the data that they're being sent to figure out what to do next? And are they exhibiting any leadership in these 3 areas that they can share with their other teachers? That gives us a real-time view of what's happening in the classrooms. That culminates every 2 weeks. We sit down with them. We call it our 20-mile march. We sit down with them and look at their data for the past 2 weeks. And we ask them 7 simple questions. Why did you group the students this way? What instructional strategy are you using with them? What did you expect to happen? What did happen? What's your biggest success? What's your biggest failure? What will you do next? 7 questions, simple, yet applied with rigor against data that informs the conversation, which makes sure that every student is moving every 2 weeks in our model, and every teacher is progressing every 2 weeks in our model. And lastly, this culminates in a quarterly goal setting with these teachers. Our bottom line metric in a failed school is student achievement. It has to be. It's a failed school. But we know that in order to achieve that bottom line metric, there's a top line objective of developing teachers as professionals. So at the beginning of every quarter, we sit down with them and say, what are 3 goals that you want to become effective in your classroom? We figure that if they pick them, they're going to be highly motivated to be trained and developed on. And then once a quarter, we give them feedback on 3 things they're doing beautifully relative to those goals, 3 areas that need work or improvement, and perhaps 3 new goals for the next quarter. And my point in all this is, between our daily classroom observations, our bi-weekly data reviews, our quarterly goal setting, in a given 200 instructional day school year, we touch our teachers from a coaching, mentoring, feedback perspective about 125 to 145 times a year. You would have to get that level of coaching in another profession, you'd probably have to be either a professional athlete or a Hollywood actor or actress. But that's where we're taking the profession. It comes together in this solution where we have the right conditions that make the turnaround worthy to be attempted, the right design solution that makes the turnaround possible, and the right execution on a few core things that make the turnaround even probable. I'll close with this. I have a dream that we turn around public education in this country. That we not only stop the trajectory that we're on, we completely eradicate it and replace it with a brand new one, where we're the first nation in the world that actually educates every single one of its children, regardless of zip code, to the highest of their God-given potential and ability that they were endowed with at birth. And that dream started with a simple question. How do we create good teachers to turn around bad schools? And this wasn't just a theory. We applied it, starting a year ago, with the worst performing school in the city of Detroit and in the state of Michigan, A.L. Holmes Elementary. In this school, we challenged the teachers a year ago to come with us. Join us on this journey. And in just 1 year's time, 80% of those kids made a gain during that year of 10% or more. 10% is significant and rare in education because it represents at least a year's worth of learning in a given year. And when we drill down on the data even further, we found that 38% of those kids made up to 2 years worth of gain. 33% made up to 3 years gain. And 29% of those kids gained more than 3 years worth of learning in a single year. We celebrated the accomplishments of the teachers by holding a gala at the nicest restaurant we could find in Detroit. How often do teachers get appreciated for the work that they do? And of all the things that I wanted to thank them on, there's one thing I wanted to thank them particularly before they broke for the summer. That they completed this statement. When I grow up. You see, I don't think any of those teachers, or any teachers in general, dream of becoming a mediocre teacher. Nobody dreams of becoming underperforming. They entered the teaching profession at one point, early in their lives, because they wanted to be great at what they wanted to do. They wanted to be able to see every child reach their potential. And here's the thing. When they began to dream about the kind of teacher they always wanted to be, we asked them at the beginning of the school year last year to share that dream with each of their students. on the first day of school. Because we knew that when students would hear their teachers' dreams, they would be inspired to dream. And so young Jalen, a fourth grader at A.L. Holmes, captures his dream this way. He wants to be a CI agent. He wants to be a patriot and defend his country. Jalen doesn't know that his dream only has a 9% chance of making it. And Jalen doesn't need to know that. See, because his teacher is realizing her dream of what she wanted to be when she grew up. And that inspires Jalen to dream his dream. And when Jalen realizes his dream, Jalen and his peers will help realize ours as a nation. Thank you.
It's encouraging hearing someone attacking this problem, isn't it? And with such amazing thought behind it. So, advice for other people in their industries. They could be at an historical institution. You're a turnaround specialist. When you go into those places, how do you advise people to make a complete change in what is happening?
You know, it really comes back to that solution. Like, make sure those 5 conditions are present. You gotta don't just want to fix the problem. Frustration with the status quo isn't enough. You gotta start with a very clear picture of where you're headed. Because otherwise you can't get everybody else in the organization to go. They'll all have their different versions of how that turnaround looks like. So it starts with that vision. Once you have that vision, then prototype towards it. Leverage the people around the organization. Don't rely, too often a lot of people rely on their small core teams of individual ability. And so the turnaround only goes as far as that leader or 1 or 2 people after them. And so that whole concept of prototyping, leverage, transparency, and even grassroots support. Think about how the different stakeholders that may want that social problem solved, what their lens is on that social problem. And then design your solution to address the deficits, and then go execute 1 or 2 things flawlessly without excuse or fail.
That's all, just the flawless part. And yeah. So if people see the opportunity, like you're changing this from within the system.
Yeah.
That's the harder way to do it, right? Or how do you choose whether, because it seems like the easier solution would have been for you to just start something that didn't exist, like start a new charter school or start a new system,
yeah,
and then start over. But you're choosing to go through systems that already exist. Why did you choose that way?
Glutton for punishment? No, honestly, so most of the best sort of education thinking, education reform is happening in charter schools, right? That's where a lot of entrepreneurs are creating new models of school. They're giving parents choice. But you go to this neighborhood in Detroit and you go to most impoverished neighborhoods, they don't have choice. It's their local school. There's no other option for them. And so charter schools, while they're successful, and I'm happy for them and I hope they continue to grow and expand, after 10 years of existence, represent or serve less than 3% of our nation's student population. So we're never going to solve the problem by just simply creating a separate standalone model that we hope people flock to. We're going to have to figure out how to reform the existing system. So it's harder, it's far more challenging and bureaucratic, but if you're successful, your ability to scale is massive. So the trade-off is much harder plowing on the front end, but the opportunity is if you get through that front end, your ability to scale this, because you're not, in the systems that we're working, the system doesn't view us as competition. They see us rehabilitating, really developing these teachers' potential. And so as a result, they become partners in our work, and as a result of their partnership, we have a really good chance to scale.
So you started this like a year and a half, 2 years ago. So talk about what have been the hardest challenges you've had to overcome as in the startup phase.
I tell this story with folks. The hardest part is those first couple of months when you leave what you're doing. I was a partner in a turnaround firm, and I left that, and literally about a month. It was probably about a month after I left, about 6 weeks after leaving that paid job to do this. And all it was an idea. It was just a concept in my head. I didn't even have it written down. And I remember waking up one morning. It was February 2011, and our house was quiet. We have 3 young kids, and my wife had taken them off to school, so I was the only one home. And I wake up and I realize I don't have anything to do today. Like, I don't have any calls, I don't have any meetings, and this panic comes over me. Like, Sajan, you are the stupidest man on the face of the planet. You don't have a business plan, you don't have funding, you don't have anything. You just have a concept. And we're in the midst of the deepest recession we've ever seen. And two questions actually just came to mind. God, do you love me? And is it okay if I fail? And I can't say I heard an audible voice, but I had this deep sense of presence that the answers were yes and yes. And you know what? After that, I was good. And so the hardest part sometimes is just overcoming your own fears of failure, insecurity, what if it doesn't work out, and just resting on the conviction that you're on the right side of right.
So let's thank Sajan.